Right, let's get into our first topic now. Is building homes more important than protecting nature? Get your calls in for this one now. Councils in England will lose the power to automatically reject new houses on greenbelt land under a shake-up of planning rules. Westminster will now be able to squash local strategies and force through developments as part of Labour's bid to build 1.5 million homes by the end of this Parliament. And with new targets forcing more than 100 councils to at least double house building, campaigners are concerned that great swathes of the countryside could be bulldozed. But yesterday, Keir Starmer made his priorities clear.
Of course we want to get the balance right with nature and the environment, but if it comes to a human being wanting to have a house for them and their family, that has to be the top priority.
What do you think, Lowri, to that?
We know we have a housing crisis, so I understand the pressure. But I think, unfortunately, Keir Starmer and particularly Angela Rayner look at this from a purely urban perspective because they don't live in a place that's about to be buried under concrete. They live in a city, they don't live in the country. They don't understand what you're asking local people to give up. Because when you live in a city, you've got all kinds of amenities. You've got cinemas, you've got theatres, you've got art galleries, you've got transport, you've got all that stuff. If you then don't live in that area, you live outside in a rural area, what you've got is green space. That is your amenity, and you're taking that away from people. And when Keir Starmer talks about, councils will no longer be allowed to block blah, blah, blah. This is about local democracy. Councils are elected by local people. And if local people say, we don't want an 8,000 home garden city there, then the council should be listening to the local people. But I live half the week in Kent now. And for example, what's happening there is that when local people have campaigned against large amounts of house building and the council have listened and it's been turned down, Angela Rayner is now calling back in those decisions and overturning them, which is completely undemocratic. One of the arguments, obviously, is that we need homes to be able to be affordable. Now, what's also happening in the real world, as opposed to Keir Starmer's world, is that planning permission has been given for large house building projects on the basis of, let's say, 30% affordable homes. That's quite high. It's more likely 20, but let's say 20 to 30%. And we'll also build you a GP surgery or we'll build you a primary school. And then what's happening is, a year, 2 years down the line, the developer says, actually, it's got a bit too expensive now, so we're only going to give you 10% affordable homes and we're not going to build the surgery. And so we're not even getting these homes are not affordable. They are for people to make large amounts of money. And the people who lose are those local people whose right to have some say over their environment has been taken away.
Well, just listening to Lowri, you can understand why people who live in rural areas or in parts near the green belt would rightly be very concerned about this sort of thing happening.
Well, where I agree with you is on sort of your critique of relying too much on private developers. I think that does give the government not enough control, and they do too often build houses that seem, identikit and poor quality. At the same time, I would say that a lot of what you said there sounded like Nimbyism. Pure and simple. Which
Do you
is to
live
say,
in a rural area?
No, but let me finish my point. So Nimbyism, the idea of Nimbyism, not in my backyard, it's to say, I like where I live. I like being surrounded by fields. Sorry, no one else can come and live here. Because the point is there are lots of people without homes. And if you just leave it down to local democracy, then all the people who live in that area can say, we like this area as it is. And what that ignores is that the population has increased. There might be other people who want to move to the countryside who want to live there. And therefore, I don't think we can just leave it down to current homeowners or current renters in that area, because there are people who aren't being represented who are the potential residents there. And if we do have a massive house crisis,
why don't they build in cities and build up in cities where you've already got the infrastructure?
They are doing that as well.
Well, except for we know that Angela Rayner's housing target, she cut the targets for building in London and increased the targets for building outside. That is not what's happening.
Another argument against building up in cities, they did try that in places like Glasgow. They went for high-rises after the war and they just turned into sort of slums. And now they're in the process of trying to knock all them down. So there are troubles and issues with building affordable flats.
Those weren't mixed developments. Those were concentrating poverty into certain areas because they were social homes. Most developments now are a mixture of things and you wouldn't have that problem. But if you look at some of the big supermarkets are talking about building housing on top of their big, and that's a really good idea. I think there is no doubt that Labour has an anti-rural agenda and this is part of it. And the idea, for example, I presume you've got a dog, haven't you?
I've got a dog.
So you walk your dog?
I walk my dog.
Where do you walk your dog?
I walk my dog on Hackney Marshes.
Right. How would you feel
Lovely.
How would you feel if where you walk your dog, they're now going to put a massive housing estate there?
Well,
that's a loss of amenity.
No, but this is
to
where
you,
this is
isn't
where I think you can have some sort of compromise. So, because I live in an urban area, I probably have a lot less green space than you do when you're in your home in the countryside. Now, I think we could probably compromise a bit. Could you not? You know, if they put some extra housing on a bit of Hackney Marshes, I'd walk the dog on other bits. Obviously, I would prefer them to build up so they don't have to put any houses there. But it seems to me that we've sort of said all of this land, no houses can be there whatsoever. Only 8% of the country is built on.
Well, yeah, but hang on.
Do we really need all of these fields that look so similar?
We're missing the fact that actually
would be quite nice.
Part of the 100 councils that are having to build these extra houses are in more urban areas. So we're talking about Richmond upon Thames is one of them that's going to have
but that's on the green belt. That's right on the edge of London, isn't it, Richmond? Yeah, it is quite a long way out. It's not.
I don't know how long it stretches for.
Kensington was one of the ones that is going to dramatically have the number of homes it's got to build increased.
I think if you look at the map, it is places that are surrounding Oxford, Manchester, even Cambridge, where I am. All the home counties in particular are being asked to build a lot more. And the problem is most of those are greenfield sites. So initially it was, it's only going to be brownfield, and then it was grey belt, and now they've said that was meant to be disused garages. Well, there weren't many of those. So now grey belt is anything that doesn't directly contribute to the point of the grid, which is a pointless.
Oxford is one place that does need to dramatically expand, in my view.
You made the comment about Labour having an agenda against rural areas. Just speaking of that, here's Angela Rayner saying, speaking earlier, she may have given nature lovers a bit of a cause concern by having newts in her sights.
We can't have a situation where a newt's more protected than people who desperately need housing. What we need is a process which says protect the nature and wildlife, but not at the expense of us building the houses we need. We could do both.
Okay, well, we could do both. That doesn't sound like
I don't really care about newts. I care about people, and I care about people who live in places which.
But what about people that don't have homes?
What about people that want to live in those places?
Well, with two things. One, absolutely.
It's I'm all right, Jack, isn't it? I live here. I like it. If you want to live here,
no, because I think you're assuming that people in the country have lots of money. There are people of all different socioeconomic categories.
Poor people can be NIMBYs as well.
Well, I think that if somebody wanted to build a house in your back garden, you wouldn't be very happy.
I don't have a back garden.
It's normal to want to hopefully love the place you live and want it to not to be changed. We haven't even mentioned immigration, and we have to mention immigration. 1 million net migration. If that carries on year after year, we will have no countryside. This is not.
No, I think that's a ridiculous thing to say.
The countryside is not something that belongs to any particular person. It has to be passed down from generation to generation. Do I want my children to live in a place where they never see green space?
90% of the country is countryside.
Yeah, but it depends where you are. In certain places, it's countryside. But actually, I would have to.
I've got stats here. 91% of land in England is of non-developed use, 88.7 is categorised within developed use, and 0.2 is categorised as vacant. Yeah, but so that's quite a lot of land that isn't built on.
You're probably including Snowdonia. You're including Scottish Highlands.
But it's not. But it's still not developed. That is green space.
We do have loads of countryside.
Okay, I want to go to calls. Jean from London, what's your view when it comes to Labour's policy now of just sort of going ahead with planning, whether the locals like it or not?
Well, I don't think we've learned much from the 70s onwards, when people first started to become aware that we need nature as much as nature needs us, because the green belt was put there as lungs for London.
Well, it was to stop urban sprawling is what it was. It was to stop urban sprawling is what it was originally put in for. But you're absolutely right in terms of having to protect nature. But when you just look at those statistics, 91%, over 91% actually, of England is not developed on. That's quite a lot of land for newts to find a home, is it not?
Well, it may be, yes, it may be. But that is another issue about how many people. Do we house the world and his wife, or do we have a limited number? Because we're a small island. We're not America, we're not Canada, we're not Australia, and they're quite strict with their immigration laws, and they're huge countries.
And yet Australia. Jean, so immigration is the problem for you. It's actually, you don't think we need to build any houses, we need to stop.
No, I'm not saying it's the problem. It may be part of it, because you know, we've been very generous to let people into this country ever since the Windrush and onwards, the Ugandan Asians, etc., etc. We cannot house the world and his wife.
Jean, it's interesting that you
haven't got the space.
Jean, it's interesting that you use the term "we are very generous." Now, of course, there are asylum seekers. That is part of our immigration numbers, but a large part, and the majority, is actually people coming over here with working visas, filling vacancies that we don't have. So we're talking about people that work in the care sector. We're talking about people that work in the NHS. Those sorts of jobs that we need, Jean. And so if they are not coming over to do it, who are we going to get to fill those positions? It may be the case that you could go to the NHS and there's no one there to care for you.
Yeah, well, put more pressure on the young people who are already here, who haven't worked since they left school, at say 16.
Very few of those people,
and are now sitting idly by, living on a meagre benefit system, trying to make ends meet, and maybe turn into crime because they want this and they want that and they want the other without working for it. Okay. Get them to work.
Okay, Jean, thank you very much for your call. Helen from Lancashire, what's your view when it comes to Labour's approach to building?
Well, I think it's the houses they're building that's the problem. We've had a load of new estates in Lancashire, and they're all 3- and 4-bedroom detached houses. How is that building houses for just the general public or for young couples? How can they possibly afford it?
Well, the affordability of houses is a massive problem. And I think the last time you were on, actually, Lowri, you were talking about an estate that had been built near you.
Well, I've got come out of Whitstable, which is where I live, and they're building all the way down the kind of main road, as it were. And they are all, as Helen is saying, they're all detached. Well, not all, but 70% detached houses, big detached houses. Now, some of them, of course, are, for example, families from Afghanistan who came, who've got many generations, and local councils need the space to be able to. So they want some of the bigger houses. But she's right. These are not cheap houses, even affordable. They're not affordable for local people. I mean, they're affordable for people like me who've come out of London and are ending up in Kent or in Hertfordshire or that kind of thing. But they're not. Local developers aren't listening to local need. I'm sure Helen would agree with that.
Thank you very much for bringing that to our attention, Helen. It is something that comes up time and time again when we talk about the housing crisis, is actually the houses that are being provided are not what we need. Deirdre, or in the places that we need them. Deirdre from Northumberland, what's your view on this?
Well, I don't agree with many things that this government's doing, but I have to say, well done to them on this occasion. It's always people who've got a roof over their heads who will object to a house being built near them. You know, there's been a point at some time in the past where that particular house they live in had to be built, and people may well have objected to it as well. The most important thing is to put a roof over people's heads. We don't own planet Earth. We're only here for a very short time. And I know people will say we have to protect it, but like has been said, 91% of Britain is undeveloped, and yes, I don't know why.
I'm going to now argue against my own point. Maybe 91% isn't enough green space for our environment. Maybe that is actually under-providing for nature. For us to survive, we need biodiversity. Maybe newts having a home is as important as people having a home in terms of the human race surviving, in terms of protecting our environment. There is no planet B. There is only this planet, and that's the only one we're getting.
Well, indeed, but, at the end of the day, we have to provide homes for the people who live on the planet. They've got to come first. And there's nobody loves nature more than I do. My back garden's like a nature reserve. And but at the end of the day, I always put people first and children first. Thousands of children are living in temporary accommodation. We have to do something about that. It's very unfair to leave those children in that situation because we're selfish and we think we own the bit of land that, prevents us from seeing across all this green space. Hey ho, I was brought up in the countryside and I've lived in the town for the past 60 years. And I funnily enough, I did adopt. People do adopt to living in the countryside. It's a selfish attitude, and I see it here in the northeast. You go into posh areas, and if they're going to build houses, oh my God, the placards go up, no homes here. Well, it angers me because that is what I keep saying. We don't own the planet, and everybody has a right to a roof over their head,
Thank
regardless.
you, Deirdre. I do wonder whether there's a compromise that can be made and whether locals' voices still can be heard, even if the building still goes ahead. Maybe just some certainty that when they say they're going to build a GP surgery, whether they go bust or not, the government will provide a GP surgery. I don't know. Sam, what's your view on this one? Sam from Kent.
Oh, hi. Just a couple of points that I agreed with was that we've got too many people, and yes, people need homes. But I'm lucky to live in a kind of semi-rural part of Kent, and they are already building on lots of our green spaces. But it's not just a case of aesthetics, as the gentleman on your panel would say. It's the air we breathe. It's understanding the importance of every tree, every blade of grass, every flower, the importance of them to the environment and mostly to the wildlife that live there. As you said, I like your new comment.
I don't think anyone will disagree with you on that our environment is important. But that blade of grass, that tree had to be cut down and mowed down in order for you to have the house that you have in a semi-rural area.
Exactly, and that's the trouble. We would have lost a lot of land already over the last couple of hundred years.
It's a bit like shutting the door after the horse is bolted.
I'm ultra cynical about this. The previous caller mentioned greed. It's so greedy because these developers will build thousands of houses on our green spaces, and they'll sell them to people that are going to rent them out at huge profit, or they'll keep them and rent them out at huge profit. And I think, when you're talking about not being able to sustain ourselves and not being able to house people, I'm so cynical. I think the government want to build on every green space and then take all the land off the farmers and get them to sell up and build on those as well. Then we'll not be able to grow our own food or sustain ourselves. And then guess what? We'll have to move back into Europe.
Oh, right. So you think this is all just a big scam to get us
it's all just that. No, I
back
don't
into
think it's all just that.
the European
But
Union?
That's the ultra.
I hadn't made that connection. That was a few jumps that
nobody has. I've been watching all the news and nobody's made that connection. Right. So maybe I'm just getting a bit obsessive. But
well, I love your passion. Thank you very much, Sam.
It absolutely does key into a view that the countryside is simply waiting to be built on, that actually there's no point growing food. But hang on, no point growing food because it's going to be made in a lab anyway, or we're going to give our cows some terrible chemical that means that they're, you know what I mean? It's about what kind of country. And we need a much bigger conversation about where should we be putting the housing? Because you're right, we have to house people. We also need to control the amount of the demand as well as improving the supply.
I think we could also be a lot more imaginative. There's so many golf courses. There's so much of the countryside given away for grouse shooting.
Don't take the golf courses away from people.
Well, I prefer housing to golf courses. Come on.
That's it. The phones are lit up now.